Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with actor, entertainer, and the most charismatic man, Percy Brown. This Los Angeles native and creative force is an actor by day and a content creator by night. He blends comedy and entertainment together to create one-of-a-kind, positive, and memorable experiences. He returns to Famous Interviews to add to the conversation that we began back in 2023 as we explore the new modern world we live in, his desire to act with Denzel Washington, the Friday the 13th movie franchise, dreams, and so much more. Dig this return trip from a true force of good in the world today.
Yeah, so let me just it starts off 2023 when we first connected. Back when we first connected, and I just joined with my manager that I'm still with today. And we had a vision, we had a game plan, and when that happened, unfortunately, the SAG-AFTRA strike happened, so things didn't go as planned for like a year. But last year, things started really picking up. I got to potentially work with Denzel, which is an ultimate goal of mine. And so 2025, this is the year. This is the year for me where I finally get that that opportunity to be on the major stage, the movie theater experience, your television set, and things are moving in that direction. And my ultimate goal is to do Marvel or DC. Superhero movies is the goal, but as of right now, we're just working and just get my face out there outside of just podcast and entertainment. Now it's dedicated to the acting space, and that's what I want people to know me for, not just the Prince of Fresh Air, but as Percy Brown, the actor.
So I got a quick question. Do you ever do Comic-Con? Do you ever go to those?
I've only been to one like 2 years ago. I don't go often. Mostly just because it's not my scene. But when I've went, it's been fun. People, notice the hair and they ask questions, but I don't go often.
I used to take my son Miles is on the spectrum, and I used to take him, I took him for a stretch of years, and, he'd take pictures with all the characters, and there wasn't a whole lot of people. And I had a friend that went this year. The prices are like 3 or 4 times what they used to be. There was a billion people there. It's like, it just, like when you mention getting involved with Marvel, I just think about how big that space has come. When I was a kid, I used to wait for Tuesdays. That was comic book day. It would release, and we'd get all of it. We'd get Gru, the Wanderer. We would get, I think Simpsons had, Matt Groening was putting out Simpsons stuff. Stan Lee, of course, was the behemoth. And it's so weird to think that that whole world has turned into the backbone of Hollywood now.
Yeah, I had this conversation, just to get back into, some of the things that's been going on, so I started my manager, and I've been, fortunate enough to, have some meetings with a couple different agents that, I want to bring on to the team. And one of the things I talk about, and I've kind of noticed, is Marvel, aka superhero movies, is dominating. If you ever think like if the movie theater experience is not what it used to be, because most people aren't going in droves unless it's a Marvel. So like this summer, they have like three movies come out. They got Superman, DC, and then Marvel has two movies coming out this year, Fantastic Four, and the other one with Bucky Barnes. And people are anticipating those movies. Those are the movies that are making consistently 800 million plus dollars. Marvel always knocks it out in the park with the $1 billion range. And it's crazy to see how the industry shifted to now you're seeing people like Denzel. You're seeing the actors who never really did action in superhero movies. Now you're seeing them getting into it because we're seeing the star power that comes with being in a Marvel or DC movie. We're seeing how some of these people who went from, doing a couple, feature films and not being no names, they get casted as Thor or Spider-Man. Now they're a household name. And it's crazy how the time has shifted. But I think right now Marvel is killing it. And, I think that's the place to be. Not everybody agrees, but if you see the careers of all these actors, it's crazy the influence and the engine behind Marvel. They're a true production for sure.
So when you were growing up, when you were really getting this formation of getting into the entertainment industry and to present yourself, what were the movies that you really dug? What are like the top movies that inspired you? Actors, movie styles. What has that been for you?
What's crazy? And this is something I've kind of seen how I kind of shifted. So growing up, my older brother, he was a big horror fan, and he watched the John Candy movies, the Robin Williams comedies in the '90s. I didn't grow up in the '90s, but I grew up on Jason Voorhees. I love horror movies, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Michael Myers, Halloween. I grew up on that, and which is crazy because Denzel was one of my biggest inspirations, and so he never did horror movies. So for me, growing up, I always wanted to be the next Jason Voorhees, and I'm not opposed to it now. But I've seen, like, for me, I've shifted from that just because I see, this is a business, and so it's one of those things where I'm broadening my perspective, and I'm seeing what is in right now. And so, I look at someone like a Denzel as inspiration because he can do multiple different roles. He could do a comedy, but Denzel will also do a drama, and then he'll do an action movie, and he does an amazing job in any role. So for me, growing up, it was the horror movies, and it still is to this day, but now it's more like the action realm, because I see that that is what's in. Like I said, like 10 years ago, not even 15 years ago, you wouldn't really have seen Denzel in a lot of action movies. Now he has Equalizer, and he's doing all of these different action roles because those are the genres right now. So I'm not ruling out a possible Jason Voorhees. If you ever see my Instagram, I actually have a post from Halloween. I always go as Jason Voorhees. That's been a staple since I was 18. But at the same time, I also want to broaden my my horizons, and my ultimate goal: work Denzel, man. I got to work with Denzel before he retires. I know it's coming soon, so I got to get in there before he calls it a day.
Manifest destiny, man. That's it. That gets me. I grew up in the '80s, and I would watch all these horror films, and I was just captivated. Like the first, the first Friday the 13th when they cut his head off at the end. I had never seen an image like that on in anything before, and it just totally freaked me out. Because you don't know how that's going to end. So sometimes, as an adult now, when I watch these horror films, it's just different. It's like sometimes it feels just a little bit too scripted, but sometimes too, I'm thinking there's all these people on set watching this, and how somber it would be after Jason's head falls off of his body on the actual set. Like whenever they say cut, is everybody like, "Oh yeah, that was great. Let's go get a drink," or like they're like, "Oh my God, what just happened?" Because they got the theatrics, they got all this stuff. Like I've always wondered on the sets of horror movies how they react when there's like an intense like Halloween scene or a Friday the 13th, like what their reaction is when they call cut after a scene like that.
That's funny you mention that, right? Because I'm a big student of the game, and one of the things I like to do is study. And I think oftentimes, sometimes as actors, we forget that, yeah, we could be in classes and stuff, but we got to know what happens behind the scenes. So one of the things I like to do is a lot of YouTube, a lot of productions now, they start doing behind the scenes content, and there's a lot of it on Friday the 13th because I'm a massive fan. So I've seen Kane Harder, one of him, Derek Mears, some of the most iconic portrayals of Jason. You get a behind the scenes scoop of how they create Jason, how they get into character, how he looks as Jason, and it's insane to see that transformation. And I had the pleasure to work with a award winning a lady, Arma Benoit. She worked on Halloween 2, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, and she got to help develop Michael Myers. And she was telling me about how that process was and how intense. When you're on set, it's kind of one of those things. After a few days, the novelty wears off, but it's insane as an outside looking in. Like, man, these guys really bring life into these characters. Not They're not just on set, laughing and joking. I know Kane Hodder talks about this, where when he's Jason, he don't talk to the cast members. He stays away from everybody. So when they see him, it's a complete shock. And so the only people that really get hands-on experience with him is the director, the makeup department. And so when he finally bursts onto the set, people are shocked and flabbergasted by this massive human being that looks like he can kill you right there. So it's a very intense process. I hear from the makeup and getting the mask on and making sure they get the character right. But man, based on what I've seen, I don't know. I know it's acting, and if I'm on set, if I see Kane Hodder walking down as a 6'4" Jason Voorhees with the mask and the knife, it's like, wow, it's incredible. And that's what I enjoy, is to see the process and see how, people can take a fictional character like Jason and see how he's become such a big icon that when they did Friday 13th 2009, when Derek Mears took over, man, that dude was a straight killer. I mean, you look at him and you like, yeah, I'm terrified of this guy because Jason looks like, even the actor looks like he can hurt you. So it's a crazy thing, and I highly recommend any actor or anybody who's a fan go watch the behind the scenes clips and see how they make the movies and see how the actors portray these characters, because even just looking at it from the making of the movie is still intense.
You know, the one movie, so when I was a kid, all of those movies would freak me out and spook me because I was young and I hadn't seen anything like that before. But as an adult, the one movie, the franchise that totally Rob Zombie freaks. I mean, when he does his stuff, it's hardcore. And I think it was Halloween 2. They actually had a wrestler that played him, and it was so intense, it was so brutal, it totally freaked me out. I remember walking my dogs after I watched it one night, and I was looking around. I never do that. I was looking over my shoulder and waiting for some like guy in a mask to be slowly approaching me from 100 feet away. It freaked me out, man.
Yeah, it's phenomenal how, certain directors. Rob Zombie is one of those guys that's his thing, and it's like Michael Bay. He has his thing. When you look into action movies, Michael Bay is the guy. Quentin Tarantino. So Rob Zombie is definitely someone that I would love to work with, because his approach to it is, I want to make this as gory and as intense as possible, because when you watch a movie, you want to believe what you're seeing. So if Jason is keep getting his butt kicked by some weak teenager, you're not gonna believe it. So for him, he knows that when people watch a Jason Voorhees, when they watch a Michael Myers or a Chucky in Child's Play, they want to see that action. They want to see the blood, the gore, all that stuff that comes with being a mass murder in that sense, right? And so, like, that's what fascinates me, is to see how they go about casting certain actors, because you can't really duplicate the guy who plays Freddy Krueger, England.
Yeah.
That dude just has that factor to make him creepy, but also make him like that cool guy that can kill you. Same thing with Kane Hodder, Derek Mears, who play these iconic roles. It takes a lot of work to play, and I think people think it's just you're just standing around looking scary. No, it takes a lot of physicality, and being able to portray someone like a Jason without being able to talk. It takes a lot of physical movement. It takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of experience to do that. And that's why Rob Zombie is able to knock it out the park, because he often gets not just actors, but people who are stunt people. So you can get that same energy when Jason is just walking down the street, or when he's set on fire. It's the same guy. So you're not getting two different Jasons in one movie. It's a very interesting, fascinating concept for sure.
So I'm curious, as you embark on bigger and better things in your life, I always think about this when actors, like people that are like, I remember when Harry Potter, when he did a stage play, I think he got naked in it, and it was a big deal and people kind of freaked out. And I've seen, like Jeffrey Dahmer portrayals of like cannibalism. There's hardcore stuff that happens on camera. Is there anything that could happen in the course of you being on camera that you're just not going to do? Because you hear that sometimes, like they're not going to do this, they're not going to do that. It's just that's not their artistic bend as an actor. Is there anything that you would rule out as you enter this new world?
Yeah, that's a conversation for any actor who might be listening. When you're in a conversation of representation, or you have representation, that's one of the first things they want to address, because they don't want to put themselves and put you in a spot where you got to decline a major opportunity, right? So for me, one of the things I often say is, and I'm not homophobe. I love the LGBTQ community, but I'm a straight man. I know as an actor, I'm not gonna be able to do a same sex scene that involves especially intimacy. That's just something that I know as an actor, I'm just not able to do convincingly. And it's just something that you got to know what your limit is and what you're comfortable with, because at the end of the day, when it comes to not just the business, but as an actor, when people watch your movie, they want to believe what they're seeing. That's what makes Denzel, the Will Smiths, the Michael Fassbenders, that makes them so great because they are able to nail that role and bring you authenticity to that role. So for me, when I get a script, I don't want to be put in a position where my manager's like, hey, I got you, on audition for this major movie that's coming out. And she doesn't know that I'm against same sex scenes, but she says she submits me anyway. Now the casting director is looking for my audition, and now I'm like, oh, I don't like this character. I don't like that. He might be a gay man who has a relationship with another man. That I know that's not my lane, so it looks bad on them that they submitted me for it, and I'm not going to turn it in. So it's definitely, one of the things I've learned is this is a business, and that's why a lot of people, you might see certain people who are able to do a lot of roles, and they're probably comfortable doing that. But you also see a lot of people stay in a specific lane. I hear people often talk about Tom Cruise and Dwayne the Rock Johnson. It's like, oh, I don't see them, doing romantic comedies and stuff. But it's because it's not that they're uncomfortable with doing it. It's just they know what they're good at. So why do something you're not going to be good at, and it's going to take a lot more work and a lot more effort to do that when you could just play the good looking charismatic lead in the action movie, kick ass, take names, and make a lot of money doing that. So yeah, same sex scenes definitely is something right now in my career. I'm not and full nudity, just because I know, based off prior experience and learning about the industry, a lot of people complain about getting typecasted as that, especially women. Unfortunately, a lot of women, they start, doing that, and it's hard for them to get anything outside of just full nudity. So it's, like I said, I have no problem with people doing that. Just me as an actor, I know I'm more comfortable with doing other stuff, and so I'll leave that to the people that's right for.
The one thing that's interesting about our times here in 2025, we interviewed in 23, was it was kind of before all of the noise of the political rumblings and everything going on. And now we're in the midst of just things are exploding in ways people are afraid, uncertain. I don't think we were feeling that in 23. As you move into this industry that's going to be depicting things that are going on in this world, and a lot of people look to artists and actors and entertainers as kind of mouthpieces and people that will help them through their art get through difficult times. How much of you going into this world, I mean, you've continually been in this world and you're going into it further. How much of really leading this life as an actor and an entertainer is on your mind in regards to this world that we're living through right now with all of the fear and uncertainty and weirdness happening?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's definitely a question I think about all the time. And it's one aspect, for me being an actor entertainer, I'm so used to being in a spot like that. I enjoy entertaining people, even with my voice. I enjoy entertaining people, but we also know we're living in a climate where you have to be careful. And Anthony Mackie, who's playing Captain America now, great movie. I hate what the critics said. It was a great movie. I disagree, but he's been doing interviews and he's been criticized for some of the things he said that were completely agreeable. It wasn't like he was, slandering anybody. He was speaking his truth. And so it's hard because when you're, someone who's independent contractor, that's what an actor is. When we're not W-2 employees, you got to be careful on how you navigate because one little mistake, one little mess up that goes viral, it could be, the end of your career, and we see it, unfortunately, look at Will Smith, one of the most beloved actors of all time. The Oscar slap came and went. It's been years and people still bring it up. So it's for me, I'm mindful of, you know, I want to be able to inspire other people. I worked at a soup kitchen in college for 4 years, and I got to work with people that a lot of others will look down upon, and it really changed my psyche in the way how I approach and look at people. So I'm very pro, helping others, and I think that is what I want to do on my platform. Yeah, I want to be known as the most charismatic man and the Prince of Fresh Air, the guy with the cool crazy hair. But at the end of the day, this is just a means to a bigger thing. Is don't be afraid to, push the boundaries. Don't be afraid to do what makes you comfortable, and don't be afraid to put yourself out there because you never really know. this conversation could inspire somebody, to get off the couch and finally go do, what they've been thinking about. And so that's what I want to do. I want to use my platform not just to entertain, but to also inspire people to not give up on their dreams because, oftentimes I hear a lot of older people, say, when I was your age, I was doing this, I was doing that, and I was too afraid to do it. And now, you're 70 and you look back and you're like, man, I wonder what if I actually got off the couch and did this? What if I put myself out there? And you never know until you actually do it. So, life is all about risk and reward. I'm not a gambler, but you sometimes have to gamble on yourself. And I think that is what my message is. Don't be afraid to gamble on yourself because you never know what's going to happen if you don't do it.
So I got to know as somebody that loves the Friday the 13th franchise. I remember when I was in the sixth grade, that 3D movie came out, and there was eyeballs, all these things flying out, and that was when 3D was starting to really kind of become a hip thing. And that was one of my favorites. Although it will never ever duplicate the first one. The first one, when that gal was on the lake and he jumped out of the water like that, man, of all scenes in horror movies, that's one of the creepiest ever. So my question to you is this: when you look at that franchise that you love, you've been dressing up as Jason since 18, you clearly love it. What is your favorite movie in that franchise and why?
All right, so I gotta start off with a disclaimer. Don't hurt me. All right, don't hurt me. You know what? I don't like part one. Not all right. Let me take that back. I don't. It's not that I hate part one. I just think, in 2025, the special effects just didn't age well. So for me, I think what aged well is one of my favorite movies of all time, Friday 13th, Jason Takes Manhattan. Although I'm a little shocked that they didn't spend more than 10 minutes in Manhattan, but that's a conversation for another thing. But Jason Takes Manhattan, Jason X, which a lot of people don't like, but I think it's a cult classic. And Friday 13th, 2009. I think those are my top three, specifically because they really upped the ante with the gore and the kills. And you saw more of Jason. And 2009 was the first time I looked at Jason, and they showed him in a more intense light. Before he used to be some supernatural, mythological creature. But in 2009, he's shown as a guy who can run. He will chase you. He will, make traps. And that is what I think 2009 for me is probably the peak for me, is because they really showed him as much more than just a slow, methodical killer. This dude was smart. He was a hunter and he would chase you. And that was the first time I seen such a big guy, especially a horror icon, running after you. Like, just imagine Jason running after you. Like, we see Michael Myers do his slow walk and then he magically appears like David Copperfield in front of you. But, to see someone like Jason run after you is crazy. So those are my top three. But if I had to choose, it's a tough one. I got to throw Freddy versus Jason in there. But if I had to rewatch another one, right now, I would probably put Jason Takes Manhattan.
So let me ask you this. I remember hearing a story, and I think it's true. Back in the day, Steven Spielberg got on the set of Universal and put a nameplate on a desk and acted like he was an employee and got kind of sucked into the wave of what they were doing, and then eventually started making film. So, with that being said, with Denzel being your guy, have you ever thought about a way of getting on the inside somehow so that you can meet him and talk to him and get some kind of inroads?
Absolutely. And that for me, that's the goal. And when I first, I mentioned it, but last year was the first time I actually started really going out for these major projects. And I remember, my manager, sent me email like, yo, you got an audition. I'm looking at it. And so, at this point in my career, right? When you get these breakdowns and these audition notices and stuff, they don't tell you exactly everything because it's confidential. So I had to do my research. And so Spike Lee was the director. So I'm thinking, I've worked with Spike Lee before, a few years ago. And so, I'm doing my research and I found out if I got the role, I would be acting alongside Denzel. So I knew I had to come right. And unfortunately the role went to a celebrity. It happens. But yeah, I would love to get in the room with Denzel just to pick his brain on his craft, because one of the things that intrigued me, it's not the celebrity, it's not the fame and the fortune, is how does he, nail the role? Like, how do you become so great that even for one line, you can make that line so memorable, but that everybody forgets about everybody else in that movie but you. It's insane how he's able to just chew the scenery. So I would love to pick his brain on the craft. We're both theater trained. We went to different schools, but he grew up in theater. I grew up in theater. We're theater trained. He's back on Broadway right now. I think he's doing Macbeth. So, I would love to, work with him and figure out his process, because I think ultimately it will make me better, but also I get to work with an icon like Denzel. Very few people can say they got to work with Denzel, and I want to be one of them before he hangs it up.
I think we've done some good work here, Percy. Your podcast is the Prince of Fresh Air. You're on the rise. You're moving towards your goal. We're putting all of this out there. Manifest destiny. It's so great to catch up. I know you've been on my show a few times. I've been on your show. It's so great to be able to collaborate and get back into it. So, man, best of luck with everything. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes your way.
Absolutely, man. It's always a pleasure, Joe. We always have great conversations, and we both understand this is a show. You can't be coming up on here talking boring. You gotta add some flavor, and it's been fun. Real quick before we wrap this up, yeah, the
Yeah.
Prince of Fresh Air is, I've been able to get a lot of great guests on. Dennis from Bad Boys, people working in the industry, publicists. One of my favorite episodes recently was a guy who did a movie with Zendaya last year, Challengers. So I'm slowly getting there. I'm getting up to your heels, Joe. Keep a lookout for me.
I totally am. And one thing that all of these actors and actresses say when they're on shows, no matter what happens, it's all about grinding it out, working, doing everything you can and getting in there. And that's always what I get from you, is that you're discovering and getting a myriad of things, whether it's reading a book or taking an adventure and learning something new. There's so many things that come into this, because actors seem to me as though they're like really good lawyers. You have to be really good at a lot of little things to add up to being a paramount talent. So that's always very evident with you.
Yeah, 100%. It's a different industry now with the self tapes. A lot of things have changed. It's not the same that it was 20 years ago. And, for me, I often say the moment you feel like you know everything is the moment you lost,
Yep.
because in this industry, you're not smarter than anybody else, and you're always willing to learn. If someone like a Michael Bay, a Rob Zombie, a Quentin Tarantino can always learn, so can you. And that's how I go about it. Is I'm always learning. This is a process. I'm always trying to pick and learn. And if I can inspire somebody else to do that and follow their dreams, let's do it. It's showtime.
My favorite player growing up was Dwight Gooden, the pitcher for the New York Mets. He was my guy, my hero. And just kind of a slight, and I don't know, I don't think this happened at the time that we interviewed last time, but he came to Kansas City. We have the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and he got inducted into something called the Hall of Game, and I found out he was coming, and I got a press pass, and I met him, and I got to interview him, and dude, when you meet that person, that one that like you totally felt like there's this kinship like with Denzel. It's unreal, man. So I can't wait for us to have that conversation down the road when you do actually get to meet and work with them. And I want to delve deeply into it. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And once I do, I'll let you know
I
real
love
quick.
it.
I'm not gonna keep it because I know we're running time. But
Yeah.
I remember I met Tom Cruise 10 years ago when I was in high school,
Wow.
and I'll never forget it. I just left school. I just finished rehearsal for a play, doing Shakespeare, and he was right here in Midtown at AMC Theaters on 66th Street. And I'll never forget when I met him and I got to shake his hand. One of the coolest experience. So it goes to show, when you put in the work, eventually it's all going to come to you. So,
Yes,
I'll
sir.
leave with that. And I always say a helping hand is a better hand. I'll leave Joe with the last word.
I love it. No, Percy, it's always a pleasure. I urge everyone to tune into the show, and Godspeed, man. I can't wait to hear about your adventures because you're on your way.
Yes. And you'll be right there with it. So,
I love it.
let's go 2025.
Yes, sir, man. Percy, stay cool, my man.
You too, Joe. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time. Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.